Like and subscribe or this will be in your room tonight. Serious, coma survivors, what was the biggest change personally or globally after waking up? I was in a coma for approximately 2 weeks. When I woke up in a St. Joseph Sparrow neurological hospital, I was tied down to the bed. At the time I woke up, I was partially paralyzed. The nurse told me that I had attempted to get up previously and I had fallen down. The nurse said that if I were to attempt to get up again and fall down, he would be responsible. I was kept strapped to the bed for a few more days until I was sent to the US Army Letterman Medical Center. I had to learn how to walk and talk again. Prior to the accident I was training for a race and running about 10 to 20 miles per day and I was in great shape. I usually bike around 2 hours round trip per day now commuting to work, but I never started running again. Most people can't tell by looking at me, but I never regained the physical strength I had before the accident. I really wanted to run marathons, but I have only run one 10-kilometer race in the last 30 years, and my results were terrible. When I was in my early 20s, I went from being in really great shape one day to waking up in the hospital lucky to be alive. It took several months of rehabilitation in the hospital before I was eventually medically retired from the army. I have been several decades since the accident, and I was never able to come close to the physical condition I was in before the accident. People looked at me as normal. There was no visible injury. People would say, "Oh, he's fine." My short-term memory was non-existent. I still have some issues, but 4 years reading and retaining information was incredibly difficult. For a long time I lived with survivor's guilt. The depression was intense. Physically my body was destroyed. My mind was fucked up. It took me a while to get my motor skills back. I actually forgot how to sleep naturally. My mind just doesn't do it anymore. I take a heavy sleeping pill to knock out for 8 hours. This is nearly 2 years ago. I still think about the dreams I had in there. Some really wild shit. Hope this answers some of your question. I got in coma because a car hit me, and after waking up I was afraid to go outside, and I would tell my mom that I don't want to go to school because I was outside and a car could hit me. I'm currently going to a psychologist to fix this trauma. Now I can go to school, I'm brave enough, but I can't go like outside the city, and being in a car really gets me a lot of anxiety, and I hate it because I know it's not common to be hit by a car multiple times. But I'm still afraid. I was in a car accident 6 months after my 18th birthday. Accident was Saturday morning. I started to wake up approximate Monday, but for hours I was asking what time it was, what happened, and I have no memory of that. I have partial amnesia for approximate 1 week before until the accident. I was in hospital for approximate 3 months altogether due to my shattered knee and other injuries. After the hospital I started to gain weight, partly because of learning to walk again. Partly because antibiotics destroyed my gut bacteria and the wrong bacteria took hold. There are indicators for that. BTW. When my mother heard that I was awake, she called me and yelled through the phone about her car that I wrecked, although it was fully insured. I know someone through a friend who was put in an induced coma for lupus, I think. They gave her chemo while she was under to fight infections she had, and it was meant to be 2 weeks. After 2 weeks the hospital couldn't wake her up and she was out for 6 months. When she woke up, she said she didn't come out of it all at once, so it took quite a while. People had left cards, flowers, and biscuits on her tables. She was being attended to lovely nurses, and she was so disoriented she said she thought she had been kidnapped and forced to work in a sweet shop making handbags. She thought the presents were bags and purses. After that, she had to learn to walk again and do all of the basic things we take for granted. She developed severe anxiety, so she went to a friend's house one night and had to leave at 7 and had to drive a specific way home. And then we found out she was only doing her route to work, the shop, and a friend's house. She became extremely tired at social events and would have to go rest. The first year was the toughest. Looking back, everything seemed cloudy. My perception was dulled. There were quirks from the brain damage. After my brain did its rewiring, I was actually better in some areas. My math skills improved. Reasoning skills too. A downside is I still have this fear of getting hurt and going back. I would rather die than go back. I was only in a coma for a week, but in the process of recovery I had to rediscover that I'd graduated college 2 years prior. My previous relationship had ended, leaving me functionally homeless and with my belongings scattered across New York City at various friends' places, and that the guy visiting me in the hospital was the one who had brought me rollerblading on a date where the accident occurred. It's been a tumultuous recovery process these past few years. I've had to say goodbye to the sense of identity I had pre-accident and come to terms with these new mental deficiencies. I'm still learning every day. Though in the past year I've finally rejoined the workforce in a meaningful way, which has done wonders for the depression. And we just got married, so I'll call that a win. I had to learn to walk again. My lungs are permanently damaged from the pneumonia and ventilator, and I no longer care to read books. I used to read several books a week, now I've read one in the past year. I suppose now I care even less about people too. My brain swelled up. Please don't take ibuprofen when you have bad alcohol poisoning. And I was medically induced into a coma for 3 days. I had to learn how to walk and lost function in my right hand and left leg. I now live with constant vertigo. For about a year after the accident, since I was deprived of fluid and chemicals, I was thrown back mentally to my teenage self, obnoxious and angry. I still live with the consequences from my actions, and I wish it away every day. My dad was in a coma for 3 days, not medically induced, but due to a rare disease. Ended up being in the hospital for over a month, but as my sister and I were kids we weren't allowed into the intensive care ward. My sister was very young. When he finally came home she was mad at him for being gone so long. She didn't understand. I was too young to understand how bad it really was, but I was glad to have him home. My dad felt a lot of survivor's guilt at first. He's in some support groups for others with the condition. He's okay now, and it's well managed, but he doesn't talk about it much. Everyone seems to be answering personally, so I'll answer globally, or at least somewhat so. I damn near drank myself to death, and was sort of in and out of a hepatic coma. My family said I'd be awake enough to answer questions or act out during the 6 weeks I don't remember, but I don't have any memory of any of it. The only nationwide or global thing that happened was Robin Williams died. It's still not real to me. On a more local scale, it was summer when I went into the hospital, and the first day I remember clearly is Labor Day. School was back in, and that just felt off. I work in a convenience store next to a school, and it took weeks after I went back to work before it felt right for the school kids to be coming in. Fall felt like it came way too early. I was only in one for a day, so there weren't a lot of changes globally, but personally there was a lot. I had to be medically induced into a coma because of my pseudocholinesterase enzyme deficiency, meaning my body didn't produce the proper enzyme to wear off the emergency anesthesia they gave me. This was in the 4th grade, so I had to be transferred to a hospital that had a child ICU. Many people don't know this, but when anesthetics don't get worn off by your body the effects can be disastrous. Both of my lungs collapsed, and my legs and right arm both suffered partial paralysis. So from my perspective I had gone to sleep and had woken up the next day at around midnight in a different hospital. I had to be on a respirator and I panicked, because when you're on one, at least in my experience, you don't feel like you are breathing. So you panic. I was crying and struggling against the nurse and my mom, who were trying to stop me from tearing the thing out myself. Eventually, after about an hour, they decided to remove the respirator. At this point it was 1:30 AM or so. My parents had been dealing with all the craziness of this, and so we are very tired. They briefly told me that something had gone wrong in the surgery and my lungs had collapsed. That night I was scared to go back to sleep because I really didn't know what had happened or why. The next day I was told the full extent of what had happened to me. I was told that I was going to have to reteach my legs how to walk before I could be discharged from the hospital. I also had to take this breathing test every few hours, where I would inhale into this little plastic gauge that would measure my capability to draw breath, but I passed those tests with flying colors right off the bat. I spent a week in the hospital relearning how to walk and building up my endurance, literally walking from the bed to the chair 4 feet from my bed. Felt like sprinting the 200 meters at the Olympics. Eventually, thanks to all my kind doctors and nurses, I was considered well enough to go home. This did not mean I was back to normal by any sense of the word. I merely met the minimum standards for realese. Walking for long periods of time hurt, and running was almost out of the question for the first few weeks out of hospital. In addition, my arm also felt weak, and writing became a chore. I was told by my doctor that I shouldn't return to school for 3 weeks, a fact that of course didn't really bother me that much. I had to take 4 months of physical therapy, twice a week appointments, to rebuild the strength in my arms and legs. I had to miss an entire season of soccer because my doctor said it was too strenuous. This was probably in my mind the biggest loss. I still have a reminder of these facts to this very day. Because of my pseudocholinesterase, I now need to wear a medical ID that would let emergency workers know that I can't have certain types of anesthesia if I'm unable to do so myself. In case you were wondering what surgery I needed, it was an appendix removal surgery. The doctors only classified it as an emergency because they thought it might explode if they waited another day. I in all reality was only supposed to miss about 2 days off school and about 3 weeks at gym due to the stitches. Instead I got a month off school, months of therapy, and a swanky new bracelet. I can't speak for myself, but my brother got in a drunk four-wheeler accident about 3 years ago. He was in a coma for at least 6 weeks. He is a great guy, but he used to be better. They said he died a couple times before he was stable. I was there every day, even though I was working 19 hours a day and using public transportation to visit him. I got 3 hours of sleep a night at most. I was on the edge of insanity. He got home, and his family took over, and I went back to my life as well. We grew up together. We aren't actually blood related, and it hurts to see him try to fill the shoes of his former self, especially because he loved fighting. The doctors said 1 concussion will kill him. I pray for him, but he is chasing the past, and he will be eaten by the present. Oh, this just happened to me. I was in a coma for 2 weeks. When I woke up in the hospital, my younger brother was the first person I saw, and he started quizzing me on photos he had of our pets, their names, etc. I don't remember anything about how I ended up there. I do remember feelings, like feeling better when my family was there in the hospital visiting me, even though I couldn't communicate that. Anyway, much testing later, and as they slowly removed all the diodes and tubing and the cooling blanket, I've been diagnosed with a type of autoimmune disorder called vasculitis. So, there is pain, but not always. Overexertion hurts, but there's plenty of worse things. The strangest thing was I woke up in the hospital just as the Corona-19 pandemic was being acknowledged as a worldwide problem. Life is strange. Guy I work with is a chef. He's pretty tall, easily over 6 feet. He was going down some stairs and banged his head in the ceiling. It didn't knock him out, and he thought nothing of it. Went home after work, went to sleep, didn't wake up for 2 weeks. I don't know how it changed him, but thought I'd share the story. He's lucky his work knew something was up when he didn't show for work the next day and a friend went to check on him. He probably would have died if no one checked on him. My dad had a massive heart attack and was put into a state of cooling, followed by a medically induced coma once they were able to revive him. He was under for about a week, if I remember correctly. He had some really wild dreams and was a little too blunt toward nursing staff when he first woke up, but afterward he was mostly himself, personality-wise. However, 4 years after the incident he dealt with the physical/mental repercussions and had to work on regaining strength in his limbs and rebuilding his vocabulary. I did also force him to contemplate his existence and his relationships with those he cared about, and he really made a conscious effort to tell people, like us, his kids, how much he cared, which was something he almost never did beforehand. It wasn't me, but my grandfather, was in a coma for 2 months. I was about 3, so all I remember is waiting in the hospital waiting room a lot, and Papa not being home for Christmas. They really did not think he was going to make it. Before the coma, according to my mom, he was a grumpy, curmudgeonly fellow with a hint of your typical working class Ohioan racism. After the coma, he became a very religious/spiritual man. He was really my example of how Christianity was supposed to be: love for others, giving generously and not judging people. Definitely not what American Christianity represents nowadays, which is why I can't in good conscience call myself a Christian anymore. but he really took his second chance seriously. The doctors in the hospital said on the off chance he survived he would be in a vegetative state. Instead I got 25 years of great memories with him, including hiking the trails of our local parks, volunteering to help the homeless and just enjoying each other's company. He died in 2018 of kidney failure. I miss him every day. IDK if mine counts or not, but I was in a diabetic coma with blood sugars at 1000 plus. It was just so weird, because not much happened other than just sleep. No dreams, just plain boring sleep. Waking up was weird. I was only in for 2.5 days, but it was so weird seeing everything again. When I was around 10, I was living in a different country than my mom due to family problems. The only one I knew was my grandpa, who visited me a few times to bring me money. I was living in a dorm, I guess. Well, I woke up one morning, I was in the hospital and the nurses told me that I was in a coma for a week, and it was a wonder that I was alive. I found out a roommate almost strangled me, and while I was trying to prevent that, I fell on the heater and my head was bleeding. And I don't remember clearly what they said, but they told me I was in a coma because of the lack of oxygen and the sudden impact on my head. I don't remember anything from my past. I'm back in the country where my family lives and everyone keeps telling me how much I've changed and that I'm nothing like before. I could suddenly speak English almost like a native speaker and German, which I've had never heard of before. My native language is Turkish, so there isn't even a slight resemblance between these two languages. Well, long story short, my whole character has changed and I can speak English and German now since I was 10. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content.